The morning sun streamed through the wide glass windows of the Grand City Hotel. Guests hurried in and out, bellboys moved quickly, and the faint sound of clinking glasses echoed from the lobby bar. In one corner near the marble staircase, a woman swept the floor quietly. Her hair was tied back neatly, and her faded uniform showed signs of wear. Yet her movements were calm, careful, and full of quiet dignity. She was one of those people no one noticed, but the hotel would feel incomplete without her. Every morning she came early before the rush began. She started from the top floor, dusting the railings, cleaning the carpets, and finally ending in the grand lobby. The guests called her the sweeping lady, though few ever asked her name. She didn't mind. She had learned long ago that life often places people in corners, and the only way to survive was to keep moving. Quietly and steadily, but every day while sweeping near the bar, her eyes wandered to one thing: the shiny black grand piano that stood under the golden chandelier. It was beautiful, polished to perfection, but it had been silent for months. No one touched it unless a musician was hired for a special event. Still, every time she saw it, something deep inside her stirred. Memories she tried to bury came floating back, of another time, another version of herself. Years ago, before life turned harsh, she had loved music. Her fingers once danced over piano keys with ease. She played in small gatherings, taught neighborhood children, and dreamed of one day performing on a real stage. But dreams, she had learned, were fragile things. When her father fell ill and bills piled up, she left music behind to take care of her family. One small decision became a lifetime of sacrifice. Over time, even her piano was sold to pay rent. The silence that followed hurt more than poverty itself. Now, as she swept near the piano, she sometimes imagined playing again. Her fingers still remembered the movements, even though her hands now held a broom instead of gliding over ivory keys. But reality always called her back. The clinking of glasses, the rush of footsteps, and the voice of her supervisor reminding her to hurry up. Dreams had no place here. That afternoon, the hotel was unusually busy. A famous billionaire was hosting a private gathering in the lounge. His name carried power. He was known for his sharp business mind, his money, and more often than not, his arrogance. The entire staff was on edge. Every surface had to shine. Every flower arrangement had to be perfect. The sweeping lady was told to stay nearby in case any spills or messes needed quick cleaning. By the time the guests arrived, the lounge filled with chatter, laughter, and the smell of expensive wine. The billionaire sat surrounded by people trying to impress him. He loved attention, and everyone gave it willingly. To him, the workers were invisible, people who existed only to serve. The sweeping lady quietly stood by a pillar, her broom in hand, listening as she waited for her cue to clean if needed. The billionaire noticed her after a while. Maybe it was the way she stood, still and humble, or maybe he was simply bored and wanted amusement. He smirked and pointed toward the piano. "Hey," he said loudly, his voice full of mock humor. "That piano's been gathering dust. You," he motioned at her, "go play something for us. Let's see what you can do." The room erupted in small laughs. His friends found the idea funny. A cleaning lady playing a grand piano. Some turned their chairs to watch, expecting a silly show. The sweeping lady froze. Her face flushed with embarrassment. She looked around, unsure if he was serious. "Sir, I'm just here to clean," she said softly. "Oh, come on," the billionaire replied, his tone mocking but playful. "It's just a piano. Play one note at least." "I need a laugh." More laughter followed. Her heart pounded. She didn't want to make a scene, but refusing might get her in trouble. The manager stood nearby, nervously watching, afraid to interfere. Slowly, she placed her broom aside. For a moment, the room quieted, curious to see what she would do. As she walked toward the piano, her steps were hesitant. Every eye in the room followed her. The polished surface reflected her face. Older, tired, yet carrying something deeper, something time couldn't erase. She sat down slowly on the stool. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. The air grew still. The billionaire leaned back, a smirk still on his face. He whispered something to his friend, who chuckled under his breath. They were waiting to laugh, but she wasn't thinking about them anymore. The moment her fingers touched the cool keys, a rush of memories flooded her mind. She remembered her small apartment years ago, the sound of her first piano, the joy in her father's eyes when she played. For a second, she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost uncertain. The sound floated gently through the air. Conversations paused. Glasses stopped clinking. The melody grew stronger, steadier, filled with emotion. Her hands moved as if they had never forgotten. She wasn't the sweeping lady anymore. She was the girl who once dreamed, the woman who had music in her soul. Every note carried a piece of her story, her struggles, her losses, her strength. The guests looked at each other, surprised. The billionaire's smirk faded slightly. He leaned forward, watching closely. The song grew deeper, more passionate, telling a story words never could. Even those who knew nothing about music felt something shift in their hearts. The lounge, once noisy with laughter, was now filled with the sound of beauty. When she finally lifted her fingers, the last note lingered in the air, trembling like a final breath. For a moment, there was silence. No one knew what to say. Then someone began clapping, softly at first and then louder. Soon the entire room joined in. The applause echoed off the marble walls. The sweeping lady slowly stood, unsure how to react. She gave a small, polite smile, her cheeks still red from embarrassment. The billionaire stood too, but his expression had completely changed. There was no mockery in his eyes now, only disbelief and respect. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than before. She hesitated, then said simply, "A long time ago." There was something about the way she said it that carried more weight than any long explanation. The billionaire nodded slowly, still lost in thought. Around them, the guests began whispering in amazement. Some even took videos, eager to share what they had just witnessed. The woman picked up her broom again as if returning to her world, but now everyone looked at her differently. When she left the room, the billionaire remained silent for a while. The music still played in his mind. It wasn't just the melody that struck him. It was the realization that beauty, grace, and talent can come from the most unexpected places. For the first time in a long time, he felt humbled. Outside, the sweeping lady walked down the quiet hallway. Her shift was almost over, but her heart felt lighter than it had in years. She hadn't played in front of anyone since her youth. For a few minutes, she had remembered who she used to be. It was like breathing after a long time underwater. That night, as she reached her small apartment and placed her uniform aside, she smiled to herself. The sound of the applause still echoed in her ears. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for today she had done something she thought she never could again. She had played not for fame or money, but simply because her soul needed it. And somewhere in that grand hotel lounge, the billionaire who once mocked her sat alone, staring at the piano, realizing that the most priceless things in life can't be bought. They come from people who carry light in their hearts even when the world stops seeing them. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with quiet whispers. The story of the sweeping lady who played the piano had spread overnight like a spark in dry grass. Guests who hadn't even been there now spoke as if they had witnessed it themselves. Some said she played like a professional. Others claimed her music brought tears to their eyes. Whatever the version, one thing was certain. Something remarkable had happened in that lounge. When she arrived at work that day, everything seemed the same. The same uniform, the same broom, the same marble floor that gleamed under the lights. But there was a strange feeling in the air. People looked at her differently. The receptionist smiled warmly. The waiters nodded in quiet respect, and even her supervisor spoke more gently than usual. She tried to brush it off, but she could feel the change. For years she had moved through these halls invisible. Now suddenly people noticed her. She went about her work as usual, dusting and cleaning with steady hands. But inside her mind was somewhere else. The sound of the piano from the day before still echoed inside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the keys beneath her fingers. For a few minutes yesterday, she had felt alive again, not just as a worker, but as someone who once had dreams. It scared her a little. She didn't want to get lost in that feeling because life had a way of reminding her where she belonged. In the lounge, the piano still stood by the window. It looked the same, yet it felt different now. Every time she passed by, her chest tightened with emotion. She wondered if anyone would ask her to play again. But deep down, she knew yesterday's moment was special because it was unexpected. Life rarely gives the same gift twice. Late that afternoon, as she polished the glass doors, she saw a tall man enter the lobby. It was the billionaire. He wasn't surrounded by his usual crowd this time. He walked alone, wearing a thoughtful expression. The staff straightened up as he passed, whispering quietly. He looked around until his eyes landed on her. Their gazes met, and for a moment she froze. He walked toward her slowly. She didn't know what to expect, perhaps another joke or maybe a complaint. But his voice was calm when he spoke. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked. She nodded nervously and followed him toward the lounge. The place was empty now, quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. He motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing, unsure if it was proper. He smiled faintly, noticing her discomfort. "I wanted to say something about yesterday," he began. "When I asked you to play, I wasn't expecting what you did. I thought it would be funny. I was wrong." He paused, his eyes drifting toward the piano. "You played beautifully. I've never heard anything like it. It wasn't just music, and it was something more." She didn't know how to respond. Compliments were rare in her world. She looked down, her hands clasped tightly. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "It was a long time ago. I used to play when I was young." He nodded slowly. "Why did you stop?" She hesitated, unsure how much to share. "Life," she said after a moment. "Sometimes it takes away the things you love before you even realize they're gone." He didn't reply immediately. There was a long silence between them, broken only by the faint sound of a clock ticking. Finally, he said, "Would you play again?" "Not for anyone else, and just for me." She looked up in surprise. "Now?" "Yes," he said gently. "Now." Her first instinct was to say no. She was just a cleaning lady, and he was a man of power. But something about his tone was different this time, softer, more sincere. Slowly, she walked toward the piano again. Her reflection shimmered on its polished surface. As she sat down, her hands trembled slightly. She didn't know what to play, so she closed her eyes and let her fingers choose. This time the music was softer, slower, like a quiet conversation between two souls. It wasn't grand or showy. It was personal, raw, full of feeling. The billionaire stood nearby, listening without moving. The notes flowed through the empty lounge like a warm breeze, carrying stories that didn't need words. When she finished, she turned to see him still standing there, lost in thought. He exhaled deeply, as if releasing something he'd been holding inside for years. "You reminded me of something," he said quietly. "Before I had all this, and before the money, the company, the attention, I used to love music too. My mother played the violin. She used to tell me that music teaches humility, that no matter how powerful you think you are, a single note can break your heart." He smiled faintly. "I forgot that somewhere along the way." She listened in silence, not knowing what to say. The man who had mocked her just a day ago now stood before her with honest eyes. For a moment, they weren't a billionaire and a cleaning lady, just two people remembering what they had lost. He reached into his coat pocket and took out a card. "I'm organizing a charity event next week," he said. "It's for underprivileged children who want to learn music but can't afford lessons. I'd like you to play there. Just one song." Her heart skipped a beat. "Me?" she asked in disbelief. "Yes, you," he said. "You have something real. Something people need to hear." She shook her head. "I can't. I haven't played in years. I'm not ready for that." He smiled gently. "You played yesterday without warning, and you moved an entire room. You're more than ready." She hesitated, torn between fear and longing. The idea terrified her, but deep inside a spark of her old self flickered. The part of her that had once dreamed of stages, applause, and music that touched hearts. She took a deep breath and said softly, "I'll think about it." He nodded, respecting her hesitation. "Take your time," he said. "But remember, chances like this don't come twice." With that, he gave a small nod and left the lounge. For a long time after he left, she stayed seated at the piano. Her reflection on the black surface looked different now, not just tired, but alive. She touched the keys again, playing a few soft notes, and smiled faintly. Maybe this was life's strange way of giving her one more chance. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. Memories came rushing back. Her first piano lesson as a child, her father's proud smile, the laughter of the children she once taught. She realized that the music had never really left her. It had just been waiting for her to find it again. The next day, she arrived at work early. Before the hotel got busy, she went to the lounge and sat at the piano again. The air was still, the morning light soft. She played quietly to herself, testing the notes, finding the rhythm she thought she'd lost. It felt strange but right, like reuniting with an old friend. The hotel manager walked in quietly and stood at the doorway listening. When she noticed him, she stopped, embarrassed. But he smiled. "You should play," he said kindly. "Everyone's still talking about you. You've given this place something it didn't have before, warmth." His words stayed with her all day. For the first time in years, she felt seen not for what she did, but for who she was. Later that week, she found herself standing backstage at a small theater downtown. The Billionaire's charity event was about to begin. The room was filled with people, business leaders, artists, and families who had come to support the cause. Her heart raced. She hadn't stood before an audience in decades. But when her name was announced and she walked toward the piano, something inside her calmed. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The notes flowed easily this time, tender, hopeful, alive. The crowd listened in silence, moved by the honesty in her music. It wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. When she finished, the applause came like a wave, warm and genuine. Among the audience, the billionaire stood, clapping with everyone else, a proud smile on his face. He knew she had reminded him, and everyone in that room, that beauty doesn't always wear fine clothes or live in big houses. Sometimes it sweeps floors quietly, waiting for the right moment to be heard. That night, when she returned home, she sat by her window and looked out at the city lights. Her hand still tingled from the piano keys. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She had found her music again, and with it, a piece of herself she thought was gone forever. The night after the charity event, she couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. The sound of applause still rang in her ears, soft but powerful. For years she had imagined what it would feel like to play again, to see people listening with their hearts instead of their eyes. But imagination never came close to the real thing. That night, when she sat at the piano and played in front of hundreds, something inside her came alive again. She felt free. The next morning, she went back to work at the hotel, her steps lighter than usual. The staff greeted her with wide smiles and cheerful words. Some even called her the pianist, half joking, half in awe. She smiled shyly, not used to attention. Her uniform was still the same, her broom still waiting, but the way people looked at her had changed completely. There was respect now and something warmer. Admiration. When she entered the lounge, the grand piano seemed different too. Sunlight fell across its glossy surface, and for a moment she just stood there looking at it. That instrument had given her more than music. It had given her a second chance. She ran her fingers softly across the keys, almost like greeting an old friend. While she was cleaning, the billionaire arrived at the hotel again. But this time, he didn't come surrounded by assistants or guests. He came quietly, dressed simply, without the usual show of wealth. When he saw her near the piano, he smiled and said, "You've been busy making people talk." She laughed lightly. "I didn't mean to." He shook his head. "That's what makes it special. You didn't plan it, and that's why it touched everyone." He paused, then added, "The charity event raised more money than I expected. Your performance moved people to give." She looked surprised. "Really?" "Yes," he said. "And not just that. Many people want to know your story. They want to meet the woman who reminded them that real talent doesn't come with luxury. It comes from the heart." She didn't know what to say. The idea of people wanting to meet her felt strange. For most of her life, she had lived in the background. Now, somehow, she had stepped into the light without meaning to. The billionaire sat down in one of the lounge chairs and looked thoughtful. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "I want to start something, a program that gives people like you a chance to share their talents. Not everyone gets the same opportunities. Sometimes the most gifted people are the ones life forgets." She listened quietly. The idea touched her deeply. "That's kind of you," she said softly. "There are so many who deserve a chance." He smiled faintly. "Would you help me build it? I can handle the business side, but I need someone who understands the heart of it. Someone like you." Her eyes widened. "Me? But I'm just a cleaning lady." He shook his head. "No. You're someone who knows what it means to lose a dream and find it again. That's more valuable than any business degree." The thought scared her. She wasn't used to being asked for her opinion or being part of something big. But at the same time, a small voice inside whispered, maybe it was time to believe in herself again. Maybe this was life giving her another path. She agreed to think about it. For the rest of the day, her mind wandered between excitement and fear. What if she failed? What if she didn't belong in that world? But another part of her remembered the stage, the applause and the warmth in the billionaire's words. Maybe it wasn't about belonging, and maybe it was about courage. A few days later, she met him again, this time in his office. The view from the window stretched across the city. Tall buildings, flashing lights, people rushing below like tiny dots. She had never been in a place like this before. It felt unreal. He explained his plan. They would start a foundation to support hidden talents, street musicians, artists, and anyone who carried beauty inside them, but never got the chance to show it. The idea filled her with hope. She thought of all the people she had met through the years, working hard just to survive, their gifts buried under routine and struggle. He looked at her and asked, "Will you join me? Not as a worker, but as a partner in this mission." Her heart pounded. She had spent her life taking orders, never giving them. The word partner sounded too big for her. But the sincerity in his eyes told her he meant it. Slowly she nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "I'll try." From that day forward, her life began to change again. She still worked at the hotel for a while, but her evenings were spent helping the Billionaire's team organize their first event. She met young musicians who played on sidewalks, artists who painted in tiny rooms, and singers who had never been on a stage. Each story reminded her of her own past, of dreams delayed but not forgotten. The first event was held in a small community hall. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of life. People from all walks of life gathered. Workers, families, students, and even some guests from the Billionaire's circle. The atmosphere was warm and real. No one cared about fame or money. They cared about feeling something genuine. When the event began, one by one, people shared their art. Some sang, some played instruments, some recited poems they had written late at night after long days of work. She watched from the side, her eyes often filling with tears. She knew that every performance was more than talent. It was courage. And she knew how much courage that took. At the end, the billionaire invited her to play the closing piece. She hesitated, then walked to the piano. The audience quieted instantly. This time she didn't feel nervous. She wasn't playing to prove herself or to impress anyone. She was playing for them, the people who carried hidden light inside. Her fingers moved smoothly, telling a story of pain, hope, and rediscovery. When she finished, the crowd rose in applause again, louder than ever. After the show, people came to thank her. A young boy said, "I want to learn to play like you." A street singer told her, "You gave me courage to keep going." She smiled at them all, her heart full. For the first time, she realized that her music wasn't just for herself anymore. It belonged to others too. Later that night, as they packed up, the billionaire approached her. "You did more than play tonight," he said. "You changed something in people. You reminded them that it's never too late to dream." She smiled, looking around the empty hall. "Maybe," she said softly. "They reminded me too." As the weeks went by, the foundation grew. More people came forward with their stories, and she helped each one with kindness and understanding. The billionaire often told people that she was the heart of the program, and he meant it. Without her, it wouldn't have the same soul. Despite her new role, she never lost her humility. She still walked to work each morning, greeting everyone with the same warmth. She didn't care about fame or recognition. All she wanted was to help others find their light, just as she had found hers again. One evening, as she sat by the piano alone, she thought about how far she had come. From sweeping floors in silence to playing music that moved hearts, it all felt like a dream. She realized that sometimes life doesn't take away your purpose. It just hides it until you're ready to see it again. The door opened quietly and the billionaire stepped in. "Still practicing?" he asked with a smile. She looked up and smiled back. "Just keeping my fingers alive." He nodded and leaned against the doorway. "You know, when I first saw you here, I thought you were just another worker. I had no idea you'd changed so much, not just in yourself, but in everyone around you." She looked at him thoughtfully. "We all change," she said. "Sometimes we just need someone to remind us we can." He smiled. "I'm glad that someone was you." The two of them shared a quiet moment. The room was still except for the faint hum of the city outside. Then she began to play again, soft, gentle, full of feeling. He listened, his eyes distant but peaceful, and in that quiet hotel lounge, Where everything had once begun, the music filled the air again, not just as a song, but as a reminder that no matter where life takes you, it's never too late to begin again. Months passed, and the foundation grew beyond anything they had imagined. What started as a small idea had now become a movement. People from different cities wrote letters, sent videos, and shared stories of hidden talents waiting to be discovered. The sweeping lady who once played quietly in a hotel lounge had now become a symbol of hope, proof that life could surprise you even after everything seemed lost. Despite the attention, she stayed humble. She still lived in her small apartment, took the bus to work, and treated everyone with kindness. She didn't care about fame or money. What mattered most was helping others rediscover their dreams. Every weekend, she visited community centers and schools, encouraging children to play music, draw, or sing. She listened to their stories, saw the light in their eyes, and reminded them that talent had no title. The billionaire, too, had changed. He was no longer the man who mocked people for his amusement. He now spent more time with real people, visiting shelters and community halls instead of luxury events. The sweeping lady had unknowingly taught him something more valuable than wealth: humility. He often said that she had reminded him of what it meant to feel human again. One evening, they sat together in the hotel lounge, the same place where it had all begun. The lights were dim, and the soft hum of the city echoed outside. The piano gleamed under the golden chandelier. He looked at her thoughtfully. "Do you ever think about how different things would have been if I hadn't called out to you that day?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe life has its strange ways of opening doors," she said. "You were not trying to be kind that day, but you still gave me the chance I needed." He nodded slowly. "I suppose we both needed that moment." The two of them sat in silence for a while, listening to the quiet sound of the piano strings as she pressed a few keys gently. The notes were soft, like a whisper between old friends. Soon after, their foundation planned its biggest event yet, a concert in the city's grand hall, where talented people from across the country would perform. It wasn't just a show. It was a celebration of second chances. The sweeping lady was asked to perform the final piece again. She hesitated at first, nervous about the scale of it all, but the billionaire assured her that her music was the heart of everything they had built. In the weeks leading up to the event, she practiced every evening after work. Her fingers had grown stronger again, and her confidence was steady. But every time she played, she thought about the long road that had brought her here, the years of struggle, the loneliness, the broom in her hands, and the unexpected moment that had changed her life. The day of the concert arrived. The grand hall glowed with light. People from all over filled the seats. Businessmen, artists, workers, children, and families. The billionaire stood at the entrance, welcoming guests with a genuine smile. Reporters took photos and cameras flashed, but he didn't care about publicity. He was proud, not of the event itself, but of what it represented. Backstage, she sat quietly at the piano, her hands resting on her lap. She could hear the crowd outside, the murmur of voices, the soft excitement in the air. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She wasn't afraid anymore. Music, she had learned, was not about perfection. It was about truth. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage. The hall fell silent. The lights dimmed slightly, leaving her in a warm glow. She sat at the piano, looked at the crowd, and then at the man sitting in the front row, the same man who had once laughed at her. Now he looked at her with pride and gratitude. Her fingers touched the keys and she began to play. The melody was gentle at first, like the sound of morning rain. Then it grew, layer by layer, into something powerful and emotional. The audience listened without a sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music carry them. Others watched her hands move with awe, realizing that this was not just a performance. It was a story told through sound. Every note she played carried a piece of her journey. The pain, the endurance, the rediscovered hope. It spoke to anyone who had ever felt invisible or forgotten. The billionaire sitting in the front row felt tears gather in his eyes. He had heard her play before, but this was different. This was her soul speaking. When the final note lingered in the air, the hall remained silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause, long, thunderous, and full of emotion. People stood up, clapping until their hands hurt. Some cried openly. The sweeping lady stood and bowed, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. After the concert, the billionaire joined her backstage. "You were incredible," he said softly. "That was more than music," she smiled. "It was a thank you," she said, "for believing in me when I had stopped believing in myself." He shook his head. "No," he said. "You taught me how to believe again. You reminded me that people are more important than money." The next day, newspapers were filled with headlines about the event. But what captured everyone's hearts wasn't just the performances, it was her story. Reporters wrote about the sweeping lady who had once been invisible, but had now become the light that inspired others. Her humility made people love her even more. She started receiving invitations to music schools, interviews, and offers to perform, but she turned most of them down. Her focus remained on the foundation. She wanted to spend her time helping others rise. Fame had never been her goal. Changing lives was. One afternoon, she visited a small school the foundation had funded. The children gathered around her, curious and shy. She sat at the old piano in their classroom and played a cheerful tune. The kids clapped and laughed. Afterward, she told them, "Never stop dreaming. Even if life takes your dream away for a while, don't give up. It might come back when you least expect it." A little girl raised her hand and asked, "Did you really clean floors before playing the piano?" She nodded with a smile. "Yes, and there's nothing wrong with that. Every job matters. Every person matters. What's important is to never forget who you are inside." The girl's eyes shone. "I want to be like you," her heart warmed. She reached out and squeezed the girl's hand gently. "Then keep believing in yourself. That's where it starts." As the months passed, her music continued to touch people. The foundation expanded, reaching more cities. The billionaire often credited her during speeches, but she always stood quietly in the background, smiling humbly. To her, every performance, every smile, every story from those they helped was worth more than applause or awards. One evening, the billionaire invited her to his home for dinner. It was the first time she had ever visited. His house was elegant but simple, filled with photographs of the foundation's events and smiling faces of the people they had helped. They talked for hours about their journey, how it began, how it changed them, and what they had learned along the way. At one point, he looked at her and said, "You know, that day I asked you to play, I thought I was doing something funny, but that moment changed my life." She chuckled softly. "Maybe we were both in the right place at the right time." He nodded. "I think fate has a strange way of working. You showed me that happiness doesn't come from money or success. It comes from purpose." She smiled, her eyes gentle. "And you showed me that sometimes kindness hides behind the people we least expect." They both laughed softly, the sound warm and sincere. As she left that night, she paused at the door and looked back. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me a reason to play again." He smiled. "No," he said quietly. "Thank you for reminding me to listen." Outside, the night air was cool. She walked slowly, the city lights twinkling around her. She thought about her journey, how far she had come, how one small moment had rewritten her story. She knew life could still be hard, but now she carried something stronger than fear. She carried faith, in herself, in others, and in the unexpected ways the world could change. As she reached her street, she looked up at the stars and smiled. Somewhere in the distance, she imagined the faint sound of a piano playing, soft, hopeful, endless. Years rolled by, and the foundation continued to touch thousands of lives. The sweeping lady's story became something people told their children, a story of courage, humility, and hope. Her picture often appeared in magazines, but she never sought the spotlight. She lived quietly, always focused on her purpose. She had learned that fame fades, but kindness remains. The piano, which once stood in the hotel lounge, was now kept in the foundation's hall, a reminder of the moment that changed everything. One morning, she arrived at the hall early, before anyone else. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, lighting up the dust floating in the air. She sat at the piano and gently ran her fingers across the keys. So many memories were tied to it. The laughter that day, the silence that followed her first notes, and the applause that changed her life. She smiled softly, feeling the warmth of gratitude in her chest. She started to play, not for anyone else, but for herself. The melody was calm and full of peace, like the gentle rhythm of a heart that had found its place in the world. After a while, the billionaire walked in. He was older now, with silver hair and a quieter presence. He watched her play for a moment before saying, "You still make it sound like magic." She laughed lightly. "It's not magic," she said. "It's just feeling," he nodded. "That's exactly what makes it magic." They sat together for a while, talking about the years that had passed. The foundation had grown beyond their dreams. There were now music centers in small towns, scholarships for young musicians, and programs that helped people who had lost hope. It had become more than either of them had ever imagined. He looked thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what's next?" he asked. She smiled. "I think about it sometimes. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know I'll keep doing what I can today." He nodded. "That's how you've always lived, one step at a time." There was a pause. He seemed to want to say something more. Finally, he said quietly, "You know, meeting you changed everything for me. I used to think success meant having more. Now I understand it means giving more." She looked at him kindly. "We both learned that together," she said. "Sometimes the most unexpected people teach us the most important lessons." He smiled, then added softly, "You were the best lesson life ever gave me." Her eyes shimmered with warmth. "And you were the reason I played again," she said. We both needed each other in our own ways. They both fell silent for a moment, the sound of the piano filling the air again. The melody was gentle, almost like a conversation without words. As months passed, her days continued with the same quiet rhythm. She taught children in the foundation, performed small concerts, and often visited hospitals to play for patients. Her presence brought calm wherever she went. She had become a symbol of compassion, not because she had achieved fame, but because she had remained genuine. One winter evening, she was invited to perform at the reopening of the same hotel where her story began. The management wanted to honor her and the Billionaire for their contribution to society. She hesitated at first, unsure if she wanted to relive that memory, but then she realized it was a circle that needed closing. When she arrived, everything felt familiar. The smell of polished wood, the echo of footsteps on marble, the grand chandelier above. The piano still stood in the same corner. Time had changed everything, yet somehow it felt like nothing had changed at all. Guests filled the lounge, dressed elegantly, talking softly. The Billionaire stood by her side, looking proud but humble. As the event began, he took the stage first, speaking briefly about the journey they had shared. "What started with laughter," he said, "became a lesson in humanity. I once mocked someone I didn't understand, and she became my greatest teacher." His words moved everyone in the room. Then it was her turn to play. She sat at the piano, looked around the room, and for a moment she saw herself from years ago. The tired cleaner, broom in hand, eyes full of quiet longing. She took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. The melody began softly, filled with memory and grace. Each note told a part of her story and the struggle, the hope, the transformation. People listened in silence, completely absorbed. Some smiled through tears. Even the waiters paused to listen. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. But this time she didn't feel overwhelmed. She simply smiled, bowed her head, and whispered to herself, "Thank you." After the event, many guests came forward to meet her, to shake her hand, to tell her how deeply her music had touched them. She greeted each one with kindness, never letting the praise change her calm nature. The Billionaire stood quietly nearby, watching her with admiration. As the crowd began to leave, he approached her. "You did it again," he said softly. "You moved them all," she smiled. "Music doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes it's the quietest notes that stay the longest." He nodded. "That's true, and your story will stay with them forever." The two of them stood together, looking at the piano that had started it all. There was a peaceful silence between them, the kind that only comes from shared understanding. Over the following years, her health began to slow her down, but her spirit remained bright. She continued to teach, write simple tunes for children, and visit the foundation whenever she could. People often told her she had changed their lives, but she always replied, "I didn't change anything. I just played what I felt." When the Billionaire visited her one afternoon, they sat together by the window, watching the sunlight pour in. "Do you ever regret anything?" he asked. She smiled softly. "No. Everything that happened, even the hard times, brought me here. And I'm thankful for all of it," he nodded. "You've always found beauty in the hardest things." She looked at him kindly. That's because I stopped looking for perfection. I just started looking for meaning. He smiled and said, and that's why your music never fades. In the years that followed, her story continued to inspire. The foundation built a new center named after her, a place where anyone, regardless of age or background, could learn music for free. Inside the hall stood her old piano, restored and shining. On its side, a small plaque read, "To the woman who played her truth and taught the world to listen." At the opening ceremony, children performed her favorite tune, the same piece she had once played in the hotel. The billionaire watched with tears in his eyes, remembering the moment that had started everything. He knew that her legacy wasn't just in music, but in the kindness she had spread. As the last notes faded, he looked at the piano and whispered, "You'd be proud." He could almost hear her laugh, gentle, full of life. Years later, the foundation continued its mission, and her story was passed down to new generations. People who never met her still spoke of her with love and respect. The sweeping lady who once stood in the shadows had become a symbol of hope that never dimmed. And somewhere, in the quiet of an empty hall, the piano still waited, its keys holding the echoes of a melody that would never be forgotten. The song of a woman who turned humility into strength, and a laugh into a lesson. A story that would forever remind the world that greatness can rise from the most ordinary moments, and that true beauty often begins with kindness.